This is picking up where we left off on configurations. We talked about how to create individual or single configurations, with the idea being that when you have a part like this, that in this case a link with a notch in it, and you're going to have lots of different linkages with different lengths, different diameters of end holes, different sizes of slots, whatever it is that's going to change, but it's still going to be a link. It's going to be something similar to this. We can make individual configurations through the configuration manager, as we showed in the other demo. But what if we know we're going to not make 2 or 3, but there could be 50 of these over the next year or two, or there could be 150 of them, 1,000, whatever. There's going to be a bunch of them. So rather than remodel this, we model it once, and rather than going to configurations and individually making an individual configuration or different version of each part, we will create a design table. So we're going to talk about design tables. With basically what it is an Excel spreadsheet sort of adapted into SolidWorks that will allow us to fill in the cells or the fields on the Excel spreadsheet and automatically create new versions of the part. To get started on a design table part, first just model the part, make sure that on all your sketches you have it fully dimensioned, fully defined, and all that. And then when we're ready to really get started in earnest making this, the first thing to do is go into the parts tree, go to the annotations folder, right click, and go to show feature dimensions. Now all the feature dimensions show up, because what we want is we want to be able to control some of these, maybe not all of them, and have them change as we go through these different versions or item numbers of parts. So I'm definitely going to want some different hole sizes. I'm going to want some different lengths as far as overall length, and maybe even width and thickness or depth of this slot. So in order to get those to show up in a table in a way that I can understand, besides just being named 6 inches, we want to turn on the dimension names. There's sort of this hidden dimension name that the computer goes by, knowing that each of these is really an individual. And so if we go to View, up in the pull down, if we go to View and go down and turn on dimension names, now notice that each one has in parentheses a dimension name. So I'll just start with this one just to pick one to edit. Grab that, come over into the properties box, and where it gives dimension name, change that to whatever it is I want that to represent. In this case, length. So we'll put in length, say OK. Now underneath the size 6 it says length. Next thing I'm going to give is a hole. Click on it so the properties box comes up. Change the name, and I'm just going to call it hole A. And then the other one can be hole B. Then for the notch length, we'll have notch L. And for the notch depth, we'll have notch D. Once you've labeled all of the things that you plan on making changeable in this chart that we're going to create, then anything that you don't really need, we can go ahead and get rid of. Well, I'm not going to, in this case, tabulate or put into the configurations this thickness, so I'm just going to hide that. And the same with the outside. In this particular case, you could definitely add that in. I'm going to hide that. And so now I've got the things on there that I want. Go ahead and close dimensions. And now I'm ready to create a design table. So I'm going to go up to Insert, Tables, Design Table. Over in the design table settings, I'm going to switch to blank instead of auto create. up here at the top. And then down here under edit control it says allow model edits to update the design table. I'm going to deselect that, and it says block model edits that would update the design table. For right now I'm just going to block any change to the model that would change the table. The idea is that I want to use the table to make the edits or changes. So I'm blocking that and I say OK. Once you check OK, basically a simple little spreadsheet builds itself in the corner. Now I'm going to give you a caution right away. This is where somebody can get themselves a little bit confused or lost. If I click outside of the design table that came up or the properties box, basically it'll close this down, and then I'll be left going, where's my table? What happened? It sort of interrupts the process. And so before you just start clicking around, basically go into add rows and columns. There's nothing I want to change, so I'm just going to say OK. And now here to me is kind of one of the magic parts, if you will, of this, is I can add these individual items to this list, but just by clicking on them, by double clicking on them. So right now it says design table for sample link, this linkage, first instance, the first version, and it's getting ready to label this row up here of headings for each column that we're going to have, each number or dimension that we want to control. So I'll go with the length first. Just double click it and then select whole A in this case. Double click on that. Double click on whole B. Length of the notch, and depth of the notch. Once I've got this list kind of populated, or all the things listed out in it, notice what it's doing. It's saying the default numbers for this first instance are a 6-inch, 1-inch, half-inch, 2-inch, half-inch for these different features. Now let's add a new instance. I'm just going to call it, it says first instance. I'll put in there second. Instance just meaning it's a version, the first instance or time that this has existed. For the second one, I'm going to have this be 12 inches long. For whole A, I'll stay with 1 inch. For whole B, I'll go to 1 inch. I'll change it. For the notch, I'll go to 3 inch. For the length, but I'll keep the 0.5 for a depth. So we've made some changes. We've got the first instance, second instance. Watch what happens when I click outside of the Excel spreadsheet box here. As I told you before, we don't want to do this until we're ready, but now that we are, I click outside of the box, and the software computes and basically says the design table generated the following configurations. It added a second one. We already had created one. Now we created a second one. So I say OK. Now if I go into looking at configurations, I see that there is a second and a default, or even a first instance. Let's double click on the second, and we see that it got longer. The holes got same size, that is, this guy now matches this one, and this guy got a little bit longer. This notch part, of course, got longer. And if we go back to the first instance, it's still the way it was. Now I'm ready to add another one. And again, this whole idea of doing design table is that this is going to come up. I don't want to model this part over and over again. I don't want to create another file or part environment. So I'm just going to create this design table so that I can have lots of versions. So now I'm going to go ahead, go to the design table, right click on it, go to edit the table. The Excel spreadsheet area comes back that adds rows and columns. I don't need any, so I'm just going to say OK. And now let's add a third version. So I'll put in third here. For the length, I want 10 inches. For the hole, I want to go smaller, 125, quite a bit smaller, 0.125. And the other one's going to be 0.125, hole B. For the notch, I'm going to go to 4 for the length, and a little shallower, 0.125 for the depth. Once I'm done with my settings, just click outside of the box, and the software says I created you a third version of it, in this case a third configuration. Whatever would show here is whatever name you gave it. I happen to give it a logical name that says it's the third one that I've created, but that could be any nomenclature that you want to use. So now in our design table we have all these versions. We still have the first instance, which is showing. Then we have the second, there we go, the second one, and our new third one. Tiny holes, shallower depth. I think you get the idea. It is a very useful tool to basically tabulate a process so that we don't have to recreate this work all the time. We create one design table and we can go in there and modify any of these guys and make new versions almost instantly.